Another day, another example of an MP being viciously trolled online. Where do you stand in this balance between what the online safety bill is aiming to achieve and free speech?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think before we get into the deep stuff, I think it's worth just reflecting on what social media in and of itself has actually allowed us all to do. You know, you can share online, Mark, as you well know, everything from the birth of a child, a wedding, a new job. I think it's important to actually, at moments like this, before we get onto the really depressing side of things, think about what social media and that technology has allowed us, enabled us to do. You know, the reason we're speaking to each other right now is through technology. I think it's an amazing tool and a phenomenal tool that has allowed us to take advantage of that profoundly, innately human desire, essentially, to share experiences with one another. But it is, of course, and this is why the government is seeking to combat this stuff, it is open to abuse, right? It is open to, you know, enabling some avenues of communication to become, frankly, quite nasty and I think despicable people. You mentioned there's some abuse at MPs, where you're able to abuse social media to send some absolutely basically, I mean, the worst stuff you can possibly imagine. I don't know how people think about this stuff, Mark. I really, really don't. But where I stand on it, as someone who, as you well know, has been subject to one or two Twitter pylons in my time, I'll tell you that for free, Mark, it can be pretty alarming when you find yourself in the eye of the storm, as it were. But despite that, Mark, I do not think that the government are getting this right with their online harms approach and their online safety bill. I really think that it's getting quite, and I dare I say it, I know this is bandied about more times than you wouldn't believe, but Orwellian. I really, really do. In the Times newspaper, we have ministers allegedly set to overhaul communication laws altogether, where you're creating new offences for the harmful effect of a message. So, Mark, if I could end this interview right now and I could send you a torrent of vile abuse, that you could even then decide that, it really messed with your head that I'd said all of this stuff. And even if you just wanted to get me, the individual that's upset you, back, I would face criminal sanction. Now, that to me, that just that's a completely different ball game that we're playing in then, right? That if I have offended you, you can therefore turn to the police and say, well, actually, he's caused me significant damage. That's really, really upset me. That was quite the blow. I can't do it. And I go back to that word, Orwellian, right? It's used far too often in contemporary politics. But for me, it perfectly encapsulates where we're at. You send a message with the intention to cause, and this is the language they use in the bill, emotional, psychological, or physical harm. Obviously, physical harm would be illegal, right? We all know and respect that. But government sources saying, for example, that anti-vaxxers spreading false information that they know to be untrue would be a good example of what would be illegal under the bill. I always go back to one example that I like, Mark, which is I would fall foul of this law now, were we to step in a time machine and go back to the early 90s when the World Health Organization told us that homosexuality was a mental disorder. Well, were I to, of course, disagree with the WHO, which I would have done, and said, actually, I don't accept that, I don't believe that being homosexual means you're mentally ill, I would fall foul of the current law because I would be, they would say that I had intent of spreading so-called disinformation and all the rest of it. I'm really worried, ultimately, Mark, about the real chilling effect that this will place on free speech and debate.
Yeah, I mean, the direction of travel is that at some point it could be that a joke could be framed as or described as hate speech, which is a real concern. And it's unusual, isn't it, and surprising that this comes from a supposedly libertarian prime minister and a freedom-loving conservative government.
Well, I mean, Boris Johnson is doing so many U-turns, it's a wonder he's not in the U-bend, Mark. It is extraordinary. Because on everything from the green stuff, he has accepted the green stuff with the zeal of a convert. You would actually think that he was the high priest of green, the way in which he's going on this week. And on everything from, as you say, being a fearless journalist who has championed the platform of free speech most of his career. Now, he's the Prime Minister presiding over legislation which could, as you say, as you rightly say, we're in the age of the non-crime hate incident, Mark, where you tell a funny joke and you get reported for a hate crime, even if, this is the phenomena, even if there is found to have been no crime committed, you still have a non-crime hate incident attached to your name which comes up on deep criminal searches, background searches into your name. That's where we're at in Britain today under Boris Johnson. It's an extraordinary state of affairs, and I think actually I'm really worried that the government simply risk in seeking to combat the kind of abuse that football players got after the Euros, Mark, the kind of abuse that MPs get, and we're learning the wrong lessons, I'm afraid, after the death of David Amess, because in combating online abuse, the government simply risk, in my view, emboldening and actually arming the permanently offended with new legislative tools to shut down debate and speech that they don't like. It's all much too broad, it's much too vague, and I think open to abuse by those who want to shut down their political opponents. I'm genuinely deeply concerned by it, and I have no idea, even on a sort of, if I wanted to be kind to Boris Johnson right now, I have no idea where the upside is to this legislation. I can only see some quite severe downsides.